Hey, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be going into everything there is to know about Joffrey Baratheon, but before we begin, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, let's jump straight into it. Joffrey is believed to be the oldest son and heir of King Robert Baratheon and Queen Cersei Lannister, both of whom entered into a marriage of political alliance after Robert took the throne by force from the Mad King, Aerys II Targaryen. In reality, his father is Jaime Lannister, Cersei's brother and murderer of Aerys and the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. His sole biological grandparents, Tywin and Joanna Lannister, were also first cousins. He had two younger siblings, Myrcella and Tommen Baratheon, who were also a product of incest between Jaime and Cersei. Despite this, only Joffrey himself shows any psychopathic traits, presumably as a result of his inbred origins. Joffrey takes after his mother in terms of looks and personality, his blonde hair being a subtle clue that he isn't really a Baratheon, who famously always possesses black hair even when only one parent is Baratheon. Cersei herself let slip to Catelyn Stark that she once had a child with black hair, who died prematurely of a fever before she had Joffrey. He is usually accompanied by his sworn shield and formidable warrior Sandor Clegane, better known as the Hound. Even before he ascends the Iron Throne, Joffrey is spoiled, arrogant, cowardly, childish, and sadistic, though he tends to hide these traits before his ascension, appearing to be the typical charming heir to the Seven Kingdoms. However, these traits are further exacerbated upon Robert's death and his ascension to the crown, proving to be one of the most twisted and malevolent Westerosi monarchs. Prince Joffrey accompanies his parents to Winterfell and is betrothed to marry Sansa Stark, as part of King Robert's plan to unite House Baratheon to House Stark by blood. Both seem happy with the prospect, and Joffrey is charming and polite towards Sansa, who later confides in her mother that she wishes to marry Joffrey. The engagement between the two of them had previously been requested by Robert, but Catelyn reminds Sansa that her father has not agreed to the match, which he eventually does, as well as his own installment as Hand of the King. However, he shows no sympathy when Bran falls from a tower and is severely injured, and has to be physically chastised by his uncle Tyrion before he will pay his respects to Bran's parents. While on the kingsroad to King's Landing, Joffrey is walking with Sansa and chances upon her sister Arya practicing swordplay with a commoner, Mycah. Joffrey sees a chance to have some fun with Mycah, who is too scared to move. Joffrey accuses him of assault on a noble girl and starts to slice into his face with his sword. Enraged, Arya hits Joffrey, allowing Mycah to get away. When Joffrey turns on Arya and threatens her, her direwolf, Nymeria, reacts in defense of her mistress and mauls Joffrey's right arm, and Arya throws his sword in the river. Joffrey begs for his life. Sansa offers her aid, but Joffrey refuses her help because she saw him so weak and defeated. Later, he lies about the incident and says he was attacked in an unprovoked manner. King Robert knows Joffrey is lying, and is disgusted that Joffrey would let a little girl disarm him, but agrees to forget about the incident in return for the death of Nymeria, which she cannot be found. Sansa's direwolf lady is executed instead. In King's Landing, Joffrey tells his mother about how he would handle the people of the North as she treats his injury. He suggests capturing Winterfell, taxing the people hard, and forcing their warriors to join a royal army. Cersei elucidates the flaws in his plan and warns Joffrey that a king needs to be more careful in choosing his battles. Cersei tells her son that everyone who isn't us is an enemy. She also urges Joffrey to do something nice for Sansa to win back her goodwill. Eddard Stark discovers that Joffrey isn't King Robert's son and rightful heir by examining the family history and realizing that black hair is the dominant trait in the Baratheon line. Eddard realizes that Joffrey's true parentage can be attributed to the incestuous relationship between his mother and his uncle Jaime Lannister. Meanwhile, Joffrey wins back Sansa's affection by giving her a pendant. When King Robert Baratheon is grievously wounded in a hunting accident, he talks to Joffrey on his deathbed and says he should have been a better father. After his death, Joffrey ascends the Iron Throne and orders that preparations be made to crown him within the fortnight. Eddard refuses to recognize Joffrey's claim to the Iron Throne. He presents a proclamation from Robert making him regent and protector of the realm to enforce his authority, but Cersei tears up the document. Eddard expects Lord Peter Baelish and Commander Janos Slint of the City Watch to take Cersei and Joffrey prisoner, but is betrayed. Eddard is taken into custody, and his remaining guards and household are murdered. Sansa is taken captive as well, but Arya manages to escape into the city thanks to her dancing teacher Syrio Florel. Influenced by his mother, Joffrey dismisses Sir Barristan Selmy from the Kingsguard and names his uncle Jaime as the new Lord Commander. Barristan is shocked, as the Kingsguard are sworn to serve for life, and it is legally impossible to dismiss one of their members. Sir Barristan is further insulted by the members of the royal court and draws his sword, sneering that even in his present situation, he could still cut his way through all opposition. But after a tense moment throws the sword at the foot of the Iron Throne and tells the boy to melt it down and add it to the rest before storming out. Joffrey listens to Sansa's pleas for her father, and he agrees to show mercy to Lord Eddard if he admits treason and recants his claim that Joffrey has no right to the throne. Sansa assures him that he will. Joffrey is present at the Great Sept of Baelor for Eddard's public trial where, due to threats to Sansa's life, he confesses to treason and acknowledges Joffrey as the true king. Joffrey, playing to the crowd, reveals that his mother and his betrothed have both urged him to spare Eddard's life and exile him to the Wall. This deal had been worked out by Queen Cersei, Varys, Grandmaster Pycelle, the High Septon, and Yoren, who was waiting in the crowd to take him into custody. Joffrey had been told to spare him, but surprises everyone by saying that his mother and betrothed have the weak hearts and constitutions of women, while he has no mercy for traitors. He orders Sir Ilan Payne to bring him Eddard's head. While this understandably horrifies Sansa, who vehemently begs for her father's life, it also horrifies both Cersei and the Small Council, as they know it will lead to another war. Cersei desperately begs for her son to reconsider his sentence, and Varys runs to the king as well. Joffrey refuses to listen, and Payne carries out the order, beheading Eddard with his own greatsword and causing Sansa to faint from shock. Joffrey's impetuous action causes the North to rise in outrage, with Ned's oldest son calling the banners and declaring war. Days later, Joffrey holds court. Marillion sings a song he wrote about King Robert and Queen Cersei, which includes lyrics saying that the boar may have disemboweled Robert, but the lion in his bed, the Lannister sigil is a lion, in case you didn't understand the reference, was the one who tore his balls off. Joffrey is displeased by the song, as it insults his parents. He forces the minstrel to choose between having his hands or tongue removed, then orders Sir Ilan to instantly carry out the order, ripping out his tongue in front of the entire horrified court. Joffrey and his guards then escort Sansa out of the courtroom. He states to her that she will be kept captive there and will still marry him. He also casually mentions that his mother said he should put a son in you, as soon as Sansa has her blood. They arrive at the castle's wall, where there are several heads mounted on long spikes. One is revealed to be Ned's. She confronts him about his promise to show mercy to her father, but he says it was mercy, as he gave him a quick death. Joffrey angrily points to another spike carrying the head of Septa Mordane. Then Joffrey forces her to look at the severed heads, and says he will give her Robb's head on a spike as well, if he were to be defeated by the Lannisters, prompting her to reply, "Or maybe he'll give me yours." Joffrey is infuriated, but restrains himself from striking her as he says, "Mother tells me a king should never strike his lady," so he simply calls on Sir Meryn Trant to strike her for him. And the knight slaps Sansa hard across the face twice with his armored gauntlet. Sansa notices how Joffrey is standing on the walkway over a steep drop to the stone courtyard below, and resolves to push him off while he is distracted, even though it would almost certainly mean her own death. The Hound realizes this and stops her right before she can push him, under the pretense of wiping the blood off her lip. He later asks Peter Baelish and Varys to begin his first small council meeting. Joffrey rules with cruelty and arrogant whims, while his grandfather Tywin Lannister fights in the War of the Five Kings to secure his hold on the Iron Throne. Joffrey celebrates his name day with a tournament and continues to torment the captive Sansa Stark, also naming Sir Dontos Hollard as his new fool as punishment for showing up drunk, although he would have had him executed if not for Sansa's intervention, whose claim that it was bad luck to execute a man on one's name day was supported by the Hound. He is perpetrated when his uncle Tyrion Lannister is made acting hand of the king. Rumors about his parentage began to circulate, and he confronts his mother, Queen Regent Cersei Lannister, with them. He asks her about King Robert Baratheon's bastard children, and she slaps him. He threatens her life and casually dismisses her before seating himself on the Iron Throne. He then arranges for a citywide massacre of the bastards, causing civil unrest in the capital. Tyrion responds by exiling Janos Slynt and installing Bronn as the replacement Lord Commander of the City Watch. Robb Stark continues to win victories against Joffrey Lannister's allies. Furious, Joffrey has Sansa Stark brought to the throne room. Before the whole court, he demands she answer for her brother's treason and threatens to kill her with a crossbow. Instead, he orders Meryn Trant to strip her and beat her. Tyrion interrupts the proceedings and scolds Joffrey for his behavior, as Sansa is his future queen. When Joffrey retorts that, as a king, he can do whatever he wishes, his uncle reminds him that the Mad King thought he could do whatever he wanted as well. Talking to Bronn, Tyrion decides that Joffrey is at an age where sexual frustration might be an issue, and this could be one reason for his torment of Sansa. He then sends Joffrey two prostitutes, Ross and Daisy, as a belated name day present. Joffrey forces one prostitute to brutally beat the other while threatening them both with a crossbow, as a message to Tyrion that he will tolerate no further interference. Joffrey attends the departure of his sister Marcella Baratheon for Dorne, as part of a marriage alliance pact. He notices his little brother Tommen crying and cruelly sneers at him for crying, because princes don't cry, according to Joffrey, reacting with anger when Sansa points out that she saw him cry once. Joffrey is confronted by the populace as he makes his way back to the Red Keep, all of whom are starving and angry. One onlooker throws some cow dung at him. Joffrey responds by ordering the several hundred-strong crowd executed, triggering a city-wide riot. The guards are quickly overwhelmed by dozens of starving and desperate people, and Joffrey barely escapes the riot under the protection of his Kingsguard, City Watch, and Lannister soldiers. But then Tyrion publicly berates him for being a vicious idiot. When they realize Sansa has been lost in the chaos, Joffrey callously commands that she be left to the mob. Tyrion has to point out that if any harm comes to Sansa, then his uncle Jaime, a prisoner of the Starks, will be killed in retaliation. King Stannis Baratheon sails on King's Landing with a fleet of over 200 ships. Joffrey is determined to fight personally, scaring his mother. Cersei suspects that Tyrion is encouraging Joffrey and plots to blackmail him into ensuring Joffrey's safety by imprisoning his lover. Joffrey tours the city wall of the city with Tyrion and insists that he will kill Stannis himself. His bravado is undercut by his woeful lack of appreciation of the danger he is in. He stupidly suggests that they should be planning to assault Robb rather than defending their capital. Joffrey procures a new sword from the Battle of the Blackwater, naming it Heart-Eater. He forces Sansa to meet him in the throne room before going to the city walls, making her kiss the blade, and claiming that when he returns it'll have Stannis' blood on it. Sansa carefully undermines his claim by questioning if he will fight in the vanguard. Joffrey is frustrated by not being made aware of Tyrion Lannister's plans to defend the city, and angrily threatens his uncle. The absence of the royal fleet frightens Joffrey. He is unnervingly pleased when Tyrion's wildfire explosion decimates Stannis' fleet. However, his courage wanes when he sees the size of the landing force that comes ashore. A sortie led by the Hound fails to drive the attackers back. The Hound then deserts his place on the Kingsguard rather than go back out. Joffrey is relieved when Sir Lancel Lannister tells him that the Queen had ordered him back to the Red Keep and ignores Tyrion, imploring him to stay and lead. His cowardly exit damages the morale of the men, but Tyrion is able to rally them into further sortie, protecting the gates from a battering ram. Tyrion is wounded during the fighting, but the battle is won and the arrival of the host of House Lannister and House Tyrell soldiers under the command of Lord Tywin Lannister. Joffrey rewards Tywin by naming him savior of the city. He also grants a favor to House Tyrell for their aid, and Sir Loras asks Joffrey to unite their houses in marriage. Joffrey balks at setting aside his betrothal to Sansa, but is easily convinced in a sham dialogue with his mother and courtiers and agrees to marry Margaery Tyrell. Sansa herself feigns sorrow, but can barely conceal her delight when out of sight. King Joffrey is passing through Flea Bottom in a heavily guarded palanquin. The riots in King's Landing recently occurred in this part of the city, ignited by him and his arrogance, and as such he is terrified of the small folk ripping him to pieces like what happened last time. His convoy suddenly stops moving because his betrothed, Margaery Tyrell, insists on interacting with the small folk and visiting an orphanage. Later that night, he has dinner with Margaery, her brother Loras, and his mother Cersei. Cersei tells Margaery that the king barely survived the recent riot, but Joffrey explains that they were not in any real danger. He also defends Margaery's actions, to Cersei's discomfort. While fitting clothes in his chambers, Cersei asks Joffrey what he thinks about Margaery, and he says the alliance with the Tyrells will help them defeat the Northern Rebellion. Cersei asks what he thinks about her personally, but Joffrey dismisses her questions. Later, Joffrey summons Margaery to his chambers. Joffrey is holding his new crossbow and asks why she failed to give Renly Baratheon a child. Margaery tells Joffrey that she doesn't believe Renly was interested in women. Joffrey says he is considering making homosexuality punished by death. He then demonstrates to Margaery how to use a crossbow. Joffrey, Margaery, Cersei, and Helaena Tyrell are visiting the Great Sept of Baelor, where the royal wedding will be held. Joffrey tells Margaery about the history of dead Targaryen kings, pointing out Aerion Targaryen in particular, and gleefully recalling how he thought drinking wildfire would turn him into a dragon. When they hear a crowd of small folk outside, Margaery suggests they greet them. Joffrey is reluctant, but has the doors opened. Joffrey and Margaery step outside to a happy, cheering crowd, while Cersei looks on angrily. When Cersei complains that Margaery manipulates her son, Tywin replies that he wishes Cersei could do so. She challenges her father to control his grandson. Tywin says that he will. However, Joffrey's authoritarian cruelty and malignancy is proven to be uncontrollable, since after Ross is caught spying on Lord Petyr Baelish, so Lord Petyr Baelish gives her to Joffrey, who brutally kills her in his chambers with his crossbow. Joffrey later summons Tywin to the throne room. Joffrey asks for a report of the small council meetings, and Tywin invites him to attend the small council meetings. Joffrey complains that Tywin holds the meetings in the Tower of the Hand, which requires him to climb many stairs. Joffrey squirms as Tywin approaches their throne, and Tywin tells him that he can be carried to the tower. Joffrey then asks for information on the rumors about Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons. Tywin confirms that the rumors are true, and Joffrey demands to know what is being done about it. Tywin tells him it is not his concern, and that he should leave such matters to his advisors. At the wedding of Tyrion Lannister and Sansa Stark, Joffrey escorts Sansa to the altar in place of her late father. He then removes Tyrion's stool, so he cannot reach Sansa's shoulders to cloak her. Joffrey laughs when Tyrion is unable to cloak her. When Sansa excuses herself from the feast, Joffrey follows her, and suggests he might pay a visit to her in her chambers that night after Tyrion passes out. Joffrey then calls for the bedding ceremony, and Tyrion insists there will be no bedding ceremony. Tyrion threatens the king with castration, which infuriates Joffrey. Tywin says they can do without the bedding ceremony, and Tyrion says he was only joking, feigning being drunk so as not to anger Joffrey to the point where he might order harm upon him. Meanwhile, the priestess Melisandre performs a ritual using leeches, filled with fresh blood forcibly taken from Gendry. At her direction, Stannis throws the leeches onto a fire and recites the names of 3 people he wants dead: the usurpers of the 7 kingdoms, the usurper Robb Stark, the usurper Balon Greyjoy, the usurper Joffrey Baratheon. At a meeting of the small council, Joffrey gleefully informs Tyrion of the deaths of Robb and Catelyn Stark, being brutally slaughtered alongside scores of their bannermen at the Red Wedding. He tells Pycelle to thank Walder Frey for his service, and wants to serve Robb's head to Sansa as his wedding feast. Varys and Tyrion take offense to this, and Tyrion threatens to take the king again. Tywin interjects by saying that he has won Joffrey's war for him. Joffrey angrily states that his supposed father won the real war, while Tywin hid in Casterly Rock. The entire room went silent, and Joffrey realized that he may have crossed one line too far. Tywin orders that Joffrey be given essence of nightshade to sedate him. Joffrey is reluctantly taken to his chambers by Cersei. With Joffrey basking in his glory, he's not very interested in planning his own wedding, including its security. Jaime attempts to go over this with him, but Joffrey insists to Jaime Lannister that the people of King's Landing know that he saved the city in the Battle of the Blackwater, and they know that he won the War of the 5 Kings, and is convinced that there will not be a riot at the wedding. Jaime also decides to personally guard Joffrey, leaving the frustrated Ser Meryn to guard Tommen and Margaery. Joffrey later chastises Jaime for his age and loss of his sword hand, remarking on his empty pages in the Book of Brothers. At a breakfast celebration on his wedding day, Joffrey receives various gifts. Among them, he is given a book by his uncle Tyrion and a Valyrian steel sword forged from Ned Stark's sword ice by his grandfather Tywin. Pleased with the gift, he promptly destroys the book with his new sword, to the horror of his guests. He says the sword needs a name. One guest suggests Widow's Wail, which gains Joffrey's approval, reminiscing that it will remind him of his execution of Eddard Stark. In the Sept of Baelor, at the Purple Wedding celebration, Joffrey and Margaery are wed. At the wedding feast, a band plays the Rains of Castamere, a song which was played at the Red Wedding as the signal for the massacre to begin. Joffrey throws money at them and tells them to go away. Later, Sir Dontos Hollard performs in front of the royal family, and Joffrey promises a gold dragon to whoever knocks Dontos' hat off, which leads to many objects being hurled at his head. Joffrey then announces some entertainment that he has organized. A group of dwarves crudely reenacting the War of the Five Kings and fighting each other. Joffrey laughs hysterically during the show, spitting wine all over himself, though virtually no one else finds the spectacle anything other than disgusting. Once the dwarf show is over, Joffrey turns his attention to Tyrion and suggests he borrow a costume and join in. Tyrion politely declines and suggests that the king take himself into the show, with a veiled reverence to Joffrey's cowardice at the Battle of the Blackwater. Outraged by his uncle's mockery, Joffrey responds by pouring his wine all over Tyrion's head and appointing Tyrion as his new cupbearer. As the crowd watches in tense silence, Joffrey drops his goblet and orders Tyrion to pick it up. He then kicks it away and tells Tyrion to pick it up again, as Sansa picks it up and hands it to Tyrion instead. Joffrey demands that Tyrion kneel before him, but Tyrion doesn't move as they glare at each other. The standoff is interrupted by Margaery, who announces the arrival of the big wedding pie, which is cut by Joffrey with Widow's Wail, revealing dozens of doves hidden inside that burst forth and fly away with the exception of a few unwitting casualties. While Joffrey is eating his pie, he commands Tyrion to stay to bring him his wine. Tyrion does this and asks to leave, which Joffrey refuses. After drinking his wine, Joffrey begins choking. As he gasps for air, he staggers down from the high table and starts vomiting on the floor. Jaime runs from the crowd, and Cersei from the high table. Cersei holds her son in her lap. Her face is turned purple, and blood is running from his eyes and nose. With a last gesture, Joffrey looks up at Tyrion, who has picked up a goblet to examine it for poison, lifts an accusing finger in his direction, and then dies of asphyxiation. Cersei immediately accuses Tyrion of poisoning her son and demands that he be arrested. Joffrey's funeral is held at the Great Sept of Baelor, with Cersei, Tommen, and Tywin attend to pay their respects. Tywin informs Tommen that with Joffrey's death, the crown will pass to him. Though the realm enters the appropriate period of mourning in the wake of the king's death, virtually no one even bothers to pretend that the late king's death was a tragedy. Over Joffrey's corpse, Tywin lectures Tommen on what it takes to be a good king, despite Cersei's feeble complaints that this is neither the time or the place for this. He says that Joffrey was neither a wise nor a good king, and that had he been, he might still be alive. After Tywin leaves and Jaime arrives, Cersei is adamant that it was Tyrion who killed Joffrey, and asks Jaime to kill him to avenge their son. Jaime scornfully asks why he was forced to love such a hateful woman, and then sleeps with Cersei in front of their son's corpse. After Joffrey's death, his younger brother Tommen succeeds him as king. Other than Cersei, Joffrey was not particularly mourned by anyone. Even his own alleged supporters had come to see him as a hindrance to future Lannister political goals. Lord Tywin himself openly scorns Joffrey in front of his own corpse during his wake, openly admitting that his grandson was an awful king and deserved what he got. Though gone, Joffrey's death had devastating consequences. Tyrion is put on a pharisaical court trial for Joffrey's murder, prompting him to demand a trial by combat. That decision ultimately leads to the near-fatal injury of Gregor Clegane and the deaths of Prince Oberyn Martell, Shae, and Tywin himself. For his part, Tyrion is freed by Jaime from imprisonment and smuggled out of Westeros after he is sentenced to death. Oberyn's death also leads to a conflict with Doran that results in the death of Myrcella. Helaena Tyrell later confides to Margaery that it was she who poisoned Joffrey in order to protect her from Joffrey's beastly nature, that he had very clearly displayed with Sansa. And Peter Baelish revealed to Sansa that he and Dantos Hollard provided Helaena with the poison. At no point did Joffrey control all of the Seven Kingdoms. In his first year of his reign, his faction only controlled the Westerlands, the Crownlands, and a narrow strip of the southern Riverlands between the two. By the second year of his reign, his faction managed to gain control of most of the southern Westeros. After the Battle of the Blackwater, he had gained control of the Stormlands in support of the Reach, with the Vale and Dorne at least neutral to his reign. For a few short weeks before the death of Robb Stark and Joffrey's own death, he nominally extended his control over the north and the Riverlands, though functional control would take some time. As scattered Stark Tully holdouts continued to resist, the Boltons were loathed almost universally in the north, so no one followed them wholeheartedly. Stannis remained free, and in defiance of Joffrey on Dragonstone, while Joffrey never controlled the Iron Islands at all. The constant civil wars of Joffrey's time on the Iron Throne drained the remaining financial resources of the Crown and House Lannister, drastically exacerbating what was already a massive debt crisis with the Iron Bank of Braavos. Being stressed with Jon Snow's reign as king in the north, Sansa remarks that Joffrey showed similar behavior, as he never listens to anyone on how to rule. Jon then questions if he's anything like Joffrey, to which Sansa replies he is the furthest from Joffrey she has ever known. In King's Landing, Cersei reels off a list of her enemies and calls Sansa, who she still believes had a hand in Joffrey's death. During the sack of Highgarden, Jaime confronts Helaena Tyrell, and Helaena notices Jaime is carrying Joffrey's old sword, Widow's Wail. She later informs Jaime that it was her who murdered him, after she herself imbibes poison provided by Jaime. She remarks that she didn't know how vicious her murder of Joffrey would end up being, and to tell Cersei that it was her who did it. Arya enters Peter's chamber and rummages through his study and furniture. While searching through his mattress, she finds a scroll written by Sansa. This turns out to be the scroll that Sansa wrote to their late brother Robb Stark, urging him to bend the knee to King Joffrey Baratheon. Arya is unaware that Sansa had written the letter under duress from Queen Cersei in an attempt to save their father Eddard Stark. Jaime revealed to Cersei that Tyrion is innocent of Joffrey's murder, telling her Helaena Tyrell confessed to it. Cersei is dismissive, until Jaime points out Helaena had far more to gain from it than Tyrion. By removing Joffrey, she left Margaery free to marry the more pliable and easily influenced Tommen. Effectively, Helaena would have become the true ruler of the Seven Kingdoms behind the scenes, in the same way that their father Tywin Lannister became the true ruler of Westeros through his grandsons. In reality, Helaena merely sought to protect her granddaughter from Joffrey's beastly nature. The fact that Margaery would then wed the much nicer Tommen was a bonus. Feeling cheated of yet another vengeance, Cersei can barely contain her fury as she laments listening to Jaime, saying Helaena ought to have died screaming. Jaime says she is dead, nonetheless, along with the rest of her family, and that they will go the same way unless they are careful. Following the battle at Dragonstone, in which Daenerys Targaryen's second dragon Rhaegal is killed, Tyrion and Varys argue in the throne room about whether Daenerys or Jon Snow, whose claim is better and would be a better ruler. As Varys feels Daenerys has slowly started to become more ruthless and paranoid, and believes Jon, who shows no signs of succumbing to the Targaryen madness, could be the better person to rule. When Varys mentions that Jon is a man and therefore more appealing to the lords of Westeros, Tyrion counters that Joffrey was a man as well, implying that him being a man did not make him less of a bad ruler. Joffrey's reign also proved to be one of the reasons why the hereditary monarchy was abolished, as Tyrion alludes to his reign as a case study, arguing to Sansa how cruel sons of kings could be. Joffrey was a cruel, arrogant, stupid, and sadistic man who became the king of Westeros. His remorseless and tyrannical rule gained him comparisons to be called another Mad King, quite a feat given the depravity and madness of Aerys II Targaryen. Sadism and brutality were his chief weapons, and he smiled as he wielded them, indulging in the agony of his subjects and servants, for example, giving a man a choice between losing his hands or his tongue. Even the people who claimed to love were not free from his cruelty, as he delighted in the thoughts of serving Sansa Stark the head of her brother Robb at his wedding feast. having his knights beat her in front of the court to exert his authority, and much more. However, he was also incompetent, impulsive, petulant, and prone to rash outbursts of violence when angered, frightened, or slightly showing that he was a coward more than anything else. As Tyrion noted, the realms have been cursed with many a vicious and foolish king, but it was unique to be cursed with a vicious idiot in one body. Much like earlier Targaryen kings, it was suspected that Joffrey's sociopathic behavior was a result of his incestuous bloodline, though his sister and brother were of a kinder disposition. While sadism and cowardice came to define him, Joffrey was consumed by megalomaniacal delusions of grandeur, even though his actions proved that he was unskilled in politics, warfare, or wisdom. Narcissism and his delusional fantasies made him capable of realizing his own shortcomings, defaulting to his royal authority when challenged and seeing dissent as defiance, making far more problems than he solved. He was convinced that he deserved praise and utter devotion from everyone around him because of his purported royal blood, even though at the start of the War of the Five Kings, most of the realm rose in rebellion against him, to the point that his faction had control of two kingdoms, the Westerlands and the Crownlands, including a narrow strip of the southern riverlands between them. Despite this, minimal standing and limited power, Joffrey's pathological arrogance, coupled with his family's backing, made him believe that he was and would be the greatest king in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. Combined with his unstable personality, Joffrey possessed a massive sense of entitlement, as well as having no impulse control thanks to his mother, Cersei. She spoiled and indulged Joffrey his entire life, almost never being able to refuse him and shielding him from consequences, inflating his already enormous ego. Cersei also outright told him that the world would be exactly what he wanted it to be, creating a kind of god-king complex within him. Moreover, his father figure, King Robert, was largely absent from his life and a terrible role model, with his constant drinking. Joffrey was deceitful, but showed even less tact than his mother, who had little to begin with. He was willing to take advantage of the trust that Sansa Stark initially placed in him, when she was blinded by fantasies of marrying her handsome prince. In general, however, Joffrey was too short-sighted and impatient to bother lying, often committing various atrocities in public without concern for the consequences, believing his authority as king gave him the right to do whatever he wished. Joffrey had precious little restraint emotionally, and would resort to petty, impractical, and childlike delights on violent degrees. For example, pouring wine over Tyrion's head, grinning at the brief duel between the Mountain and the Hound, or sneering while scarring Micah. In his deluded and remorseless view of the world, he would cling to any sadistic urge that came to mind, and never considered the long-term repercussions of his actions, thinking himself clever when he was a fool, not unlike his mother. His execution of Ned Stark was more than likely an impulsive decision for his own soul and personal enjoyment, than for the latter's supposed treason, and was a disastrous move that plunged the Seven Kingdoms into a full-on war. Joffrey's view on his own family, immediate and alleged both, was influenced by his own impulsiveness and self-absorption, and it is clear that he did not truly hold his family in high regards. Despite her protectiveness of him and constant support for his actions for most of his life, he was comfortable with being misogynistic and condescending toward his mother, Cersei, insinuating that her status as a woman, and mocking Robert Baratheon's disloyal to her. Joffrey taunted and belittled his true father, Jaime Lannister, as an unexceptional knight and for the loss of his hand. In addition, he apparently bullied and tormented Tommen and Myrcella their entire lives, never connecting with them in any way. For example, the Starks did, and even considering Tommen weak for crying like any normal person. Even his grandfather, Tywin Lannister, was a person he held in contempt, being arrogant enough to furiously accuse Tywin of being a coward during Robert's rebellion, in comparison to Robert Baratheon, who climactically killed Rhaegar Targaryen in combat and took the crown for himself. This scene is particularly interesting, because Joffrey is oblivious to himself doing the same thing. Tyrion and Tywin fought, bled, and prevailed against the insurgent Stannis Baratheon, while Joffrey hid behind the walls of the Red Keep without even killing a single invader. Based on all this, Robert was probably the only relative Joffrey held in any high regard, and Robert wasn't even Joffrey's father. The worst relationship that Joffrey had was with his uncle Tyrion. and on several occasions Tyrion stymied and accosted Joffrey for his sadistic, cruel, and arrogant actions. And Joffrey at several points went to petty means of mocking and berating him. This probably influenced Joffrey's urge to point at Tyrion mere moments before he died, as one final stab at his uncle for so much as standing in his way. The only person that seemed to be at all capable of controlling Joffrey was Tywin, who was able to intimidate Joffrey by mere presence. For example, on the occasion where Joffrey accused Tywin of cowardice, Tywin simply sent the boy to bed. Joffrey was obsessed with the self-conception that he was a great warrior like King Robert, but displayed no martial skill. Joffrey never raised a weapon against an enemy combatant in his entire life, excluding Tyrion's birthday present to him, despite bragging that he would cut down Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon in battle himself, which he never came close to at any point in the war. Despite the fact that his faction was losing the war and bracing for a siege in King's Landing, Joffrey insisted that was the time for him to strike against the Stark forces, as they were distracted by the capture of Winterfell. However, Tyrion pointed out that his own city was on the verge of attack by Stannis' superior forces. His delusions were so extensive that during breakfast prior to his wedding, Joffrey noted, after receiving the Valyrian steel sword Widow's Wail, that using it would be like cutting off Ned Stark's head all over again, implying that he was the one who beheaded Lord Eddard, even though he had simply ordered it, and Ilyn Payne was the one who actually did it. He also boasted before the Battle of the Blackwater that he would personally engage Stannis and kill him in combat, but never cross the latter in combat throughout the entirety of the battle. Later on, to add stupidity to absurdity, he arrogantly claimed that he had saved King's Landing and personally broke Stannis Baratheon at the Battle of the Blackwater, when it was in fact entirely down to his uncle and grandfather's military efforts, whereas Joffrey turned cowardice and fled the battle, and Stannis himself was not entirely broken because he could still pose a threat to his opponents in the war, and his claims still stood to reason. His bloodlust was often overpowered by sheer cowardice. He rarely killed manually, nor did he initiate a fight where his opponent stood a decent chance of besting him. Because of this, he preferred tormenting animals and vulnerable people rather than fighting warriors, and regularly went on hunts because of this. Akin to Robert, but at least the latter was legitimately skilled at fighting men. Described as a vicious idiot by his uncle Tyrion, Joffrey was not simply a ruthless, cruel tyrant, but so incompetent it beggars belief. While Robert was also not skilled at ruling, though not as bad as Joffrey, he was at least respected as a great warrior. Joffrey, in contrast, had no redeeming value whatsoever. His only claim to rule was that he was the son of Robert, the previous king. The great irony, of course, was that Joffrey was actually Jaime's bastard son and had no valid claim to the throne. But a large number of Joffrey's followers continued to obey his crazed orders with near blind devotion. After hearing the rumors of his true parentage, Joffrey, out of spite and petulance, ordered that all of Robert's bastards be killed to make sure no one would challenge his claim as heir. As one would expect, his rashness backfired, and served to heighten suspicions when the people saw the atrocity that Joffrey committed by destroying the evidence of the truth. His legitimacy along with it. This is one of several occasions where Joffrey overextends himself, the other being when he apparently sends Sir Mandon Moore to kill Tyrion during the Battle of the Blackwater, ignoring two factors. Tyrion was leading Joffrey's men against Stannis when Joffrey abandoned the battle. Also, the Kingsguard, at least by reputation, only ever served major members of the royal family, among whom Joffrey is supreme, and his hatred of Tyrion is far too well known. Thus, Joffrey's actions are never properly calculated, and he never anticipates repercussions from them. Joffrey possesses all of the classical traits of narcissism. As he possesses an outrageous temper, his delusion about his self-importance and superiority, and quick to torment and harm anyone who displeases him. He is known for his unstable mannerisms and affect when insulted, and has a very short fuse. He lacks remorse and empathy towards people, and has no ability or desire to expand it. He is entirely apathetic and even cold towards his brother Tommen when the latter cries over the departure of his sister Marcella. He even conceitedly claims that the prince shouldn't cry, despite the fact that he witnessed crying himself. When confronted with this fact, he brushed it aside when Sansa pointed out that her brother Rickon cried himself, to which Joffrey claimed it was irrelevant because Rickon Stark wasn't a prince and Joffrey was. but he did not stop to speculate that this didn't make the slightest scrap of difference. Once in a while, Joffrey does make a valid point, such as that the feudal levy system in the Seven Kingdoms is somewhat antiquated, or that his advisors should be worried about Daenerys Targaryen, reportedly hatching 3 new dragons in Essos, or that his grandfather Tywin Lannister bode his time before he finally aided the rebels during Robert's rebellion. Joffrey was capable of logic, but only if the situation was obvious, and even then he got it wrong most of the time. After being poisoned at his wedding feast, he incorrectly assumed that it was Tyrion. Presumably, he came to this conclusion due to his uncle's constant chiding, insulting, and threatening, as well as his use of physical punishment to discipline his wild, uncontrollable nephew, or the fact that he made cupbearer, and the only person who held the opportunity to poison his wine. This makes no sense, by the way. His hatred of his uncle may have also been a factor in this conclusion. Joffrey rarely made a valid insight, and often when used as a means for a narrative to underscore that everyone else is simply overlooking something. If someone as stupid as Joffrey realized this, it should have been obvious to everyone else. Even on those first 2 points, Joffrey was quite short-sighted. He was concerned about Daenerys in the Far East, despite the fact that Robb Stark was already leading major armies in rebellion in Westeros itself, and didn't consider that he should concentrate on the much more immediate threat, which is how Tyrion reacted to the news of Daenerys. Similarly, while he vaguely said that having a standing royal army was better than using feudal levies, Cersei had to explain to him that his suggestion for how to make one was too impractical to work. If a royal army conscripts men from the north, they still wouldn't feel enthusiastic about attacking their fellow Northmen. Joffrey may also have been correct when he said that the Stark forces were distracted after the capture of Winterfell. That would have been the perfect opportunity to strike, but once again Tyrion had to remind him that his own city was preparing for a siege by Stannis Baratheon. Despite his lack of technical abilities and shortcomings in battle or combat, he was surprisingly knowledgeable on crossbows, which he demonstrates to Margaery, knowing their makes and models, effectiveness, and was able to use them quite well, being able to shoot a bolt through the eye of a well-mounted stuffed boar's head several meters away. His only direct kill with one, however, was Ross, a prostitute woman who he restrained, and it was shown that he missed his shot multiple times due to the scattered arrows across the room, though these may have been for torturing her with the threat of death by missing intentionally, which would not be outside the realm of possibility for someone like Joffrey. Despite all of these negative traits, however, Joffrey is shown to be capable of feeling very limited emotion. On Robert's deathbed, he is visibly shocked and saddened that his legal father may be dying and holding his hand, and in the books it is stated by various characters that Joffrey is very fond of Sandor Clegane, despite his outwardly aloof manner towards him. He was probably more fond of the Hound because the man was a prolific and savage warrior, and had no complaints or restraints about killing, disregarding the fact that the Hound hated his even more savage brother, who was probably more aggressive and impractically violent than Joffrey himself, making him more interested in the Hound's combat prowess and aloofness, and Joffrey probably would have been terrified of the Mountain. He treated Margaery Tyrell much better than he did with Sansa Stark during their betrothal, although this is due to Margaery manipulating him by pretending to be intrigued by his playful sadism. On the other hand, he also acted charming and kind to Sansa initially before turning her into his plaything to abuse, and this one act was because his mother demanded him to do so. But he only became this way after their father confessed treason, and her brother raised his armies against his claim. A major point in the story is that Joffrey has absolutely no redeeming qualities, other than that he is rather handsome according to some. He is not simply cruel, but an under-imbecile, and so incompetent that he can only be regarded as dangerous, even when dealing with his power base in House Lannister. From a standpoint of ruthless impracticality, Joffrey was an insane idiot who does more harm to House Lannister than good. Even so, people in the narrative who haven't met Joffrey, or only see him in public events at King's Landing, have difficulty accepting that he is a cruel lunatic. This goes against the simplistic worldview that has been impressed on them by their own popular culture of romance songs and poetry. Sansa in particular became obsessed with Joffrey after encountering him, simply because he was very handsome, even though she knew absolutely nothing about his personality. Even into the first months of Joffrey's reign as king, many commoners assumed that the good King Joffrey will soon restore peace and order, and put an end to the war. At first, some can't really grasp that Joffrey himself started the war with a flippant outburst which killed Eddard Stark, and thus assumed Eddard may have deserved it, given that no sane ruler would randomly execute a major lord without justification. Only gradually and grudgingly do people start to suspect that Joffrey might not be a fit king, but even then they try to rationalize this disconnect between Joffrey's beautiful appearance and horrible personality, by latching onto the belief that assuredly Joffrey's uncle, the demon monkey dwarf Tyrion, must be leading the boy astray with bad counsel. Only after Joffrey had several meltdowns in open court and brazenly commits several atrocities in full view of the public, like needlessly starting the riots in King's Landing by antagonizing starving refugees, do people start to accept that someone like Joffrey could truly be so evil. So what did you guys think of Joffrey Baratheon? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.